Story 1. Gypsy Rose Blanchard was born on July 27, 1991, in Louisiana. Her mother, Claudine Blanchard, was 24 years old. Her father, Rod Blanchard, was 18. Rod left the family shortly after Gypsy was born. He stayed in contact with Dee Dee, that was what everyone called Claudine, but he did not live with them. Gypsy grew up knowing her father saw her sometimes, but her mother was the one who raised her day to day. For the first years of Gypsy's life, she and her mother lived in Slidell, Louisiana. Money was tight. At one point they lived in a car. Later they found public housing. Dee Dee told people that her family had abandoned them after Dee Dee's own mother died. Gypsy learned to rely only on her mother. The two of them formed a close, tight-knit unit. Dee Dee often took Gypsy to doctors. She said Gypsy had many health problems. She said Gypsy had muscle weakness, seizures, and trouble breathing. She said Gypsy needed a wheelchair, a feeding tube, and oxygen. Gypsy came to believe these things about herself. She did not know that many of the conditions her mother described were not real. When Gypsy was young, a charity gave the family a trip to Disney World. A local newspaper wrote a story about them in 2003. The story said Gypsy was a Brownie Girl Scout and that the family was grateful for help with medical costs. By that time, Dee Dee had already started shaving Gypsy's head. Dee Dee told Gypsy that her medications would make her hair fall out anyway, so it was better to shave it first. Gypsy wore wigs in public. She also used a wheelchair when they went out, even though she could walk. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit Louisiana. Their home was destroyed. Dee Dee and Gypsy moved to Missouri. They first lived in a rental home in Aurora. Then in 2008, Habitat for Humanity built them a small house in Springfield, Missouri. The house had a wheelchair ramp and a hot tub. Local news stories showed a single mother with a severely disabled daughter who had escaped the hurricane. People in the community felt sorry for them. They donated money and supplies. Dee Dee began using the name Claudinia Blanchard on some documents, but she still went by Dee Dee. Gypsy's father, Rod, remained in touch from a distance. He paid child support. Dee Dee told him Gypsy had a chromosomal defect that explained her many illnesses. Rod believed her. He did not question the doctors or the treatments. Gypsy rarely saw him in person. For years, Dee Dee controlled almost everything Gypsy did. She gave Gypsy liquid nutrition supplements called Pediasure, even though Gypsy was well into her 20s. She took Gypsy to doctors constantly. She kept Gypsy in a wheelchair when they were in public, even though Gypsy could walk inside their home when no one was looking. Dee Dee also shaved Gypsy's head regularly. She told Gypsy that she was much younger than her real age. At some point, Dee Dee had a copy of Gypsy's birth certificate altered to show a birth year of 1995. Gypsy later said that for 14 years she was unsure how old she actually was. Despite Dee Dee's control, Gypsy found ways to use the internet. She started going to science fiction and fantasy conventions in 2001. In a convention crowd, she could sometimes blend in without her wheelchair. At one convention in 2011, Gypsy tried to meet a man she had talked to online. Dee Dee found her in a hotel room with him. Dee Dee showed the man the false birth certificate that made Gypsy look younger, and she threatened to call the police. After that, Dee Dee watched Gypsy even more closely. Around 2012, Gypsy was still using the internet. She went on a Christian singles website. There she met a man named Nicholas Godejohn. He lived in Big Bend, Wisconsin. He was close to her age. They started talking online and over the phone. Gypsy told him about her life. She told him that her mother controlled her and that she wanted to leave. Nicholas listened. Over time, their conversations became more serious. They talked about being together. Gypsy began to think about how she could get away from her mother. In 2014, Gypsy confided in a neighbor named Alea Woodmansey. Alea was 23 and saw Gypsy as a younger sister. Gypsy told Alea that she and Nicholas had talked about running away together. She said they had even picked out names for future children. Alea did not know that Gypsy was actually in her 20s. Gypsy kept up several social media accounts under different names to hide her conversations from her mother. By early 2015, Gypsy had started to take small steps toward independence. She stole money from her mother and hid it. She made plans with Nicholas. She knew her mother would never let her date anyone. She also knew that if she tried to leave on her own, her mother would come after her. She had seen how Dee reacted when she tried to meet that man at the convention. Gypsy began to think she needed a way to make sure her mother could not stop her. She and Nicholas talked about what that might take. One day Gypsy came up with a plan. She would pay for Nicholas to travel to Springfield. She would pretend to meet him for the first time in a public place, as if by chance, with her mother there. That way, her mother would not know they had already been in contact for years. Gypsy told Nicholas to come to Missouri. She had the money ready. The plan was set for June 2015. In early June 2015, Gypsy used money she had taken from her mother to buy a bus ticket for Nicholas Godejohn. He traveled from Wisconsin to Springfield, Missouri. Gypsy did not tell her mother that she already knew him. Instead, she arranged for them to meet at a movie theater. Gypsy and Dee went to the theater on the planned day. Nicholas arrived. Gypsy acted as if she was meeting him for the first time. She introduced him to Dee. The meeting did not go well. Gypsy later said that Dee did not like Nicholas and that the introduction didn't go well at all. Nicholas returned to Wisconsin after that meeting, but Gypsy and Nicholas continued talking. They had already been discussing the idea of killing Dee for about a year. Gypsy had considered other ways before, such as poison or hiring someone, but those plans had not moved forward. After the failed movie theater introduction, Gypsy told Nicholas that she still wanted to escape. She said she believed the only way to be free was to have her mother dead. Nicholas agreed to help. Gypsy told him she had plans A, B, and C to be with him, and killing Dee was part of those plans. Gypsy arranged for Nicholas to return to Springfield a second time. She stole more money from her mother to pay for his trip. Nicholas arrived on June 10, 2015. Gypsy and Dee were away at a doctor's appointment when he got into town. Nicholas waited until they returned home. That night, Dee went to sleep in her bedroom. Gypsy and Nicholas stayed in Gypsy's room. Gypsy gave Nicholas duct tape, gloves, and a knife. She told him to use the knife. She said Dee was asleep in her bed. Gypsy later said she went into the bathroom and covered her ears so she would not hear what happened next. Nicholas entered Dee's bedroom. Dee was lying in bed. Nicholas stabbed her 4 times in the back. Dee died in her bed. After the stabbing, Nicholas went back to Gypsy's room. He and Gypsy had sex. Then they searched the house. They found more than $4,400 in cash that Dee had been keeping inside the home. Gypsy took the money. She also took some of her personal belongings. The two of them left the house and called a taxi to take them to a motel outside Springfield. At the motel, they stayed for several days. They went to nearby stores and security cameras recorded them. During this time, Gypsy did not use a wheelchair. She walked without assistance. She wore a blonde wig. She and Nicholas discussed where to go next. They decided to travel to Nicholas's home in Wisconsin. Before leaving, they mailed the knife to Nicholas's address in Wisconsin so they would not be caught carrying it. They took a bus to Wisconsin. Witnesses at the bus station saw Gypsy walking normally, without a wheelchair or oxygen tank. She and Nicholas arrived in Wisconsin and went to his house. Meanwhile, in Springfield, friends and neighbors began to notice something wrong. Dee had posted things on her Facebook account that did not sound like her. Friends tried to call the house, but no one answered. A neighbor went to the Blanchard house and saw that Dee's car was still in the driveway. Gypsy's wheelchairs were inside the house. The windows had protective film that made it hard to see inside. Friends gathered outside the house. They called the police to check on Dee Dee and Gypsy. The police arrived, but did not have a search warrant yet. They allowed a neighbor to climb through a window to look inside. The neighbor reported that the house was mostly undisturbed. He saw Gypsy's wheelchairs. He did not immediately find Dee Dee. The police waited until they obtained a warrant. When they entered, they found Dee Dee's body in her bed. At that point, the police did not know where Gypsy was. Neighbors were concerned because Gypsy supposedly needed a wheelchair, oxygen, and feeding tube. A friend set up a GoFundMe page to raise money for Dee Dee's funeral and for Gypsy's care. But one of the neighbors, Alea Woodmansey, remembered what Gypsy had told her about a secret boyfriend. She told the police about Nicholas Gojon. She showed them printouts of Gypsy's old messages that mentioned his name. The police used that information to trace the Facebook posts made from Dee Dee's account after her death. They asked Facebook for the internet address or IP address that had been used to post those messages. The IP address traced back to Wisconsin. Specifically, it led to the town of Big Bend, where Nicholas Gojon lived. At that point, law enforcement in Wisconsin was notified. Officers went to the Gojon home. Inside, they found Nicholas and Gypsy. Both surrendered and were taken into custody. Gypsy was not using a wheelchair. She was not on oxygen. She did not have a feeding tube. She was later brought back to Missouri to face charges. The crime had been discovered because friends noticed strange social media activity, the car in the driveway, and no response at the door. The neighbor's tip gave police the name of the boyfriend, and the digital trail led them directly to Wisconsin. After Gypsy and Nicholas were taken into custody in Wisconsin, both were held pending extradition to Missouri. Law enforcement in Greene County, Missouri, filed charges. The news of Gypsy's arrest spread quickly back to Springfield. Many people in the community had believed Gypsy was a seriously ill child who needed constant care. When they saw her walking and healthy in the police footage, they were confused. Sheriff Jim Arnott held a press conference. He announced that Gypsy was safe but warned that things are not always what they appear. He also told the public not to donate money to the family until investigators understood the full scope of the fraud that had taken place. Detectives began looking into the history of Gypsy's medical claims. They reviewed old records and interviewed family members, neighbors, and doctors. They found that Gypsy did not have the severe illnesses her mother had described. She could walk. She did not need a feeding tube or oxygen. Dee Dee had taken her to numerous doctors over many years and had exaggerated or fabricated symptoms. Some medical professionals had believed Dee Dee without independently verifying the conditions. Investigators concluded that Dee Dee had controlled Gypsy through lies, isolation, and the false appearance of illness. This information became part of the case file and was later shared with the court. Gypsy and Nicholas were extradited to Springfield, Missouri, and held in the Greene County Jail. Each was charged with first-degree murder and armed criminal action. The bond for each was set at $1 million. While in jail, Gypsy spoke with her defense attorneys. The prosecution also began building its case, using the physical evidence from the crime scene, the knife that had been mailed to Wisconsin, the taxi and motel records, the store surveillance footage, and the digital messages between Gypsy and Nicholas. As the case moved forward, the prosecutor offered Gypsy a plea agreement. Under the agreement, Gypsy would plead guilty to second-degree murder instead of going to trial for first-degree murder. The armed criminal action charge would be dropped. Gypsy accepted. On July 1, 2016, she appeared in court and formally pleaded guilty. She told the judge that she had asked Nicholas to kill her mother and that she had provided the knife, gloves, and duct tape. She also described the years of abuse and control by Dee Dee. The judge accepted the plea. On July 6, 2016, Gypsy was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Because she had already served time in jail since her arrest, that time counted toward her sentence. Nicholas Gojan did not accept a plea deal. His case went to trial in November 2018. The prosecution presented the evidence that Gypsy had testified to. Nicholas had traveled to Springfield with the intention of killing DD. He had used the knife Gypsy gave him, and he had stabbed DD 4 times. The defense argued that Nicholas had autism and a dependent personality disorder, and that Gypsy had manipulated him. Gypsy herself testified for the prosecution. She described how she and Nicholas had planned the murder together over the course of a year. She said Nicholas had agreed to do it because he wanted to be with her. The jury found Nicholas Gojan guilty of first-degree murder and armed criminal action. In February 2019, the judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder conviction, plus an additional 25 years for the armed criminal action charge. After the trials, the full story became public through court documents, news reports, and later documentaries. People learned how DD had controlled Gypsy for most of her life. Many people who had known the Blanchards expressed shock that they had been misled for so long. Gypsy served her sentence at the Chillicothe Correctional Center in Missouri. She became eligible for parole after serving a portion of her 10-year term. She was granted parole and released on December 28, 2023. Upon release, she began living with her then-husband, Ryan Anderson, whom she had married while in prison. She later divorced him in 2024. Nicholas Gojan remains in prison serving his life sentence without the possibility of parole. The case ended with 2 different outcomes based on the roles each person played. Gypsy, who had endured years of abuse and who cooperated with prosecutors, received a 10-year sentence and was released on parole. Nicholas, who physically carried out the stabbing and was found to have acted with deliberation, received a life sentence. The story of Gypsy Rose Blanchard and the murder of D.D. Blanchard is a record of how deception, control, and desperation led to a violent death, and how the legal system weighed the abuse Gypsy suffered against her role in the crime. Story 2. Grant Amato was born on May 20th, 1989, in Orlando, Florida. His father, Chad Amato, worked as a clinical pharmacist. His mother, Margaret Amato, worked as a senior operations manager. Grant was the youngest of 3 boys. His oldest brother, Jason, was a half-brother who lived apart from the family. His other brother, Cody, was close to Grant in age. The family lived in a quiet area called Chiliota, east of Orlando. Grant and Cody grew up together and did most things side by side. They attended Timber Creek High School. Both boys joined the weightlifting team because they had become interested in fitness and health. After high school, Grant and Cody went to the University of Central Florida. They studied nursing together, and both later pursued further training to become nurse anesthetists. Cody completed his nurse anesthetist program. Grant, however, dropped out before finishing. Still, he was able to find work as a nurse at Advent Health Orlando, a hospital in the city. For a time, he held that job and lived a routine life. In June 2018, Grant was suspended from the hospital. The reason given was that he was suspected of stealing and improperly giving medication to patients. Hospital staff found 8 empty vials of a sedative called propofol in 2 rooms that Grant had been in charge of. No doctor had ordered those vials. When hospital officials questioned Grant during his suspension, he said he had given the drug to patients who were not being kept relaxed enough. The hospital then fired him. Police investigated and arrested him on a charge of grand larceny. The charge was later dropped, but Grant lost his nursing job and could not find new work easily. Because he was unemployed, Grant tried to become a live streamer on a platform called Twitch. He told his family he would stream himself playing video games to earn money. His family believed in the idea and paid for the computer equipment and streaming setup he said he needed. Instead of using the equipment to build a streaming career, Grant spent his time visiting adult websites. One of those sites was MyFreeCams, where users pay by the minute to interact with webcam models. There he met a woman from Bulgaria who used the online name Sylvie, or Adasuite. Her real name was Sylvia Vencislavova. Grant began spending hours on the site each night. A user buys tokens to pay the models. Grant bought thousands of tokens at a time, sometimes spending over $600 in a single session. Sylvie's shows cost 90 tokens per minute. To impress her, Grant pretended to be a wealthy and successful gamer. He sent her gifts such as lingerie and sex toys. He used credit cards that belonged to his family members without telling them. When his family asked, he said the charges were for his Twitch streaming business. Over the course of a few months, Grant spent about $200,000 of his family's money on Sylvie. His family grew worried about his behavior. They believed he had become addicted to the internet and to pornography. They paid $15,000 to send him to a rehabilitation center that treated those problems. Grant stayed there for a couple of weeks. When he returned home, his family gave him a strict ultimatum. He had to find a job, and he was not allowed to have any contact with Sylvie. For a short time, Grant followed the rules, but soon he convinced his mother to let him use her phone. With that phone, he contacted Sylvie again. When his father, Chad, learned that Grant had broken the no-contact rule, he became angry. Chad ordered Grant to pack his belongings and leave the family home. The argument was tense, and Grant was told he was no longer welcome to stay there. On the evening of January 24th, 2019, Grant was still living away from the family home after his father had ordered him to leave. But he returned to the house that night. Months earlier, Grant had stolen a handgun from a friend. It was an IWI Jericho 941 pistol, and he had also taken 6 rounds of ammunition. He kept the gun hidden. That evening he brought the gun with him. His mother, Margaret, was inside the house working on the computer in the home office. Grant walked up behind her. Without any warning, he raised the pistol and shot her once in the back of the head. She died instantly. Her body fell forward onto the desk. Grant then waited for his father to come home. When Chad arrived and walked into the kitchen, Grant shot him twice. Chad fell to the floor onto his back and died there. After killing both parents, Grant knew his brother Cody would return from his nursing shift at some point. Grant wanted Cody to come to the house so he could kill him too. To make sure Cody would come without suspicion, Grant took his father's phone and sent a text message to Cody using Chad's number. The message appeared to come from their father, so Cody did not know anything was wrong. Cody arrived at the house and entered through the door. As soon as he was inside, Grant shot him. Cody fell to the floor in a storage room and lay curled in a fetal position. He died there. Before leaving the house, Grant tried to make it look like Cody had committed the murders and then killed himself. He took the pistol and placed it near Cody's body. He arranged the scene so it would appear that Cody was the shooter. Then Grant left the residence. The next morning, January 25th, Cody did not show up for work. His co-workers knew he was usually reliable, so they became concerned. They called the police and asked for a wellness check at the family home. Police arrived at 9:17 a.m. They knocked and got no answer. They found that all the doors and windows were locked, so they entered through other means. Inside, officers discovered the 3 bodies. Chad was in the kitchen lying on his back. Margaret was slumped over the desk in the office. Cody was in the storage room with the gun near him. The scene was secured, and investigators began their work. Grant was not at the home. No one knew where he had gone. Meanwhile, Grant had fled in his car, a 1996 Honda Accord. He drove to a DoubleTree hotel in Orange County, Florida, and checked in. He did not know yet that police had found the bodies and were looking for him. After the police found the 3 bodies inside the home, They began identifying the victims and looking for any survivors or suspects. They quickly learned that Grant Amato was the only member of the immediate family who was not accounted for. His car was missing, and he was not answering his phone. Investigators noted the gun placed near Cody's body, but preliminary examination showed that Cody's hand did not match the position of the weapon. The staging did not hold up under basic scrutiny. Police issued a lookout for Grant and his 1996 Honda Accord. They tracked the car through toll records and license plate readers. The vehicle had been driven from the Chiliota area toward Orange County. On the morning of January 26th, about 24 hours after the bodies were discovered, officers located the car in the parking lot of a DoubleTree hotel. They entered the hotel and found Grant in a room. He was taken into custody without incident and brought to a police station for questioning. During the interrogation, Grant gave multiple versions of what had happened. In one account, he said he had driven past the house after the murders and saw police in news vans, but instead of stopping, he went to a Panera Bread restaurant and used his phone to search for top news stories. In other versions, he claimed he knew nothing about the killings. Detectives presented evidence that the gun used in the shootings had been stolen from a friend months earlier, and that Grant's phone and car placed him at the house during the time the murders occurred. Near the end of the interrogation, Grant's older brother Jason was allowed to speak with him. Jason pleaded with Grant to confess to what he had done. Grant refused and continued to insist he was innocent. After the questioning ended, police formally arrested Grant and charged him with 3 counts of first-degree murder. He was held without bond at first, but in April 2019 a judge set bond at $750,000 with strict conditions including no internet access if released. Grant did not post bond and remained in jail. The trial began on July 15, 2019. Prosecutors presented crime scene analysts who showed that the gun had been deliberately moved to Cody's hand after Cody was already dead. They also presented phone records, toll records, and the testimony of family members about the argument that had led to Grant being told to leave the home. The defense argued that investigators had focused on Grant too quickly and may have overlooked other possibilities, but the evidence tied Grant directly to the killings. After the jury heard all the testimony, they found Grant guilty of all 3 counts of first-degree murder. The state of Florida had sought the death penalty, but Florida law requires a unanimous jury vote for a death sentence. The jury did not reach a unanimous decision on sentencing, which meant the death penalty was taken off the table. By law, the judge was required to sentence Grant to life in prison without the possibility of parole. On August 12, 2019, the judge imposed 3 consecutive life sentences. When asked if he felt remorse for killing his parents and his brother, Grant replied that his family had been blaming him for months for ruining their lives and stealing from them, so he said he might as well be blamed for this too. He showed no admission of guilt. After the case ended, the victim's extended family, including Grant's brother Jason, were left to grieve the loss of Chad, Margaret, and Cody. The house where the killings occurred was sold years later. Grant remains in state prison, serving his 3 life sentences with no chance of release. The investigation and trial closed without any other suspects ever being considered, and the case was officially concluded with his conviction. Story 3. Brenton Harrison Tarrant was born on October 27, 1990 in Grafton, a small town in New South Wales, Australia. His father worked as a cleaner. His mother was a teacher. He had 1 sister. The family lived in a modest home, and by all accounts his early years were ordinary. When Brenton was still young, his parents separated. His father moved out of the family home, and Brenton continued to live with his mother and sister. He attended Grafton High School, where classmates and teachers later described him as a quiet boy. He did not stand out for any strong opinions or unusual behavior. He kept to himself, but was not seen as troubled. After finishing high school, Brenton enrolled in university. He studied for a period, but did not earn a degree. He left university and found work as a personal trainer at a local gym. For several years, he trained clients and stayed in the Grafton area. People who worked with him said he seemed normal and did not express extreme political or religious ideas during that time. In August 2017, Brenton left Australia and traveled to New Zealand. He settled in Dunedin, a city on the South Island, and rented a house in the suburb of Andersons Bay. Not long after arriving, he joined a gun club in the area and began visiting its shooting range. About 2 years before the attacks, Tarrant began planning. He chose his targets 3 months in advance. He wanted to attack mosques on a Friday, when they would be busiest with worshippers attending prayer. He used the internet to find floor plans, interior photos, and prayer schedules for 2 mosques in Christchurch: the Al Noor Mosque on Deans Avenue and the Linwood Islamic Center on Linwood Avenue. On January 8, 2019, Tarrant drove from Dunedin to Christchurch. That day he flew a drone over the grounds of the Al Noor Mosque to study the layout and entrances. He also drove past the Linwood Islamic Center to see the building and the driveway. He made notes about where to park, how to enter, and where worshippers would gather. To carry out the attack, Tarrant collected weapons over more than a year. He held a New Zealand firearms license, which he had obtained in November 2017. Between December 2017 and March 2019, he bought 6 guns: 2 AR-15 style rifles, 2 shotguns, and 2 other rifles. He also bought more than 7,000 rounds of ammunition and high-capacity magazines online. The magazines allowed him to fire many shots without reloading. He painted white writing on his guns. The writing included names of historical battles, names of people killed in Islamic terrorist attacks, and slogans used by white supremacists. On the day of the attack, March 15, 2019, Tarrant wore an armored vest with 7 loaded magazines in the front pockets. He attached a GoPro camera to a helmet on his head so he could record everything. He put 4 incendiary devices in his car, planning to set the mosque on fire after the shooting. Minutes before he began, Tarrant sent a 74-page manifesto to more than 30 recipients, including the New Zealand Prime Minister's office and several news outlets. The manifesto explained his beliefs: white nationalism, anti-immigrant views, and a conspiracy theory about the Great Replacement. He posted links to the manifesto on internet forums. At 1:32 p.m., he started a live stream on Facebook from his car as he drove toward the Al Noor Mosque. He played music through his car speakers, including a Serb nationalist song and a British military marching song. At 1:39 p.m., Tarrant parked his car in the driveway next to the Al Noor Mosque. He armed himself with a shotgun and an AR-15 style rifle. He walked toward the front entrance. At 1:40 p.m., a worshipper saw him and said, "Hello, brother." Tarrant fired his shotgun 9 times toward the entrance, killing 4 men immediately. He dropped the shotgun, picked up the AR-15 rifle, and moved inside. A strobe light attached to the rifle flashed, disorienting the people inside. He fired into the prayer hall, where dozens of men and boys had gathered. He moved down hallways, shooting people at close range. One worshipper, Naeem Rashid, charged at Tarrant and knocked him to the ground. In the struggle, a magazine fell from Tarrant's vest. Tarrant got up and shot Rashid several times, killing him. Tarrant then went outside and shot a man near the car park. He returned to his car, took a second AR-15 rifle, and went back into the mosque. He shot people who were already wounded and lying on the floor. He came out again and shot a woman who was injured on the ground. Then he got back in his car and drove away. 6 minutes had passed since he first entered. As he drove toward the Linwood Islamic Center, Tarrant fired his shotgun through the windscreen and out the window at people fleeing on foot and in cars. He drove at high speed, weaving across lanes and onto the median strip. At one point, he aimed a shotgun at a driver in another vehicle and pulled the trigger twice, but the gun did not fire. At 1:52 p.m., Tarrant arrived at the Linwood Islamic Center. He pulled into the driveway and parked so that his car blocked the entrance. About 100 people were inside. He got out with a rifle and tried to find the main door. Unable to locate it immediately, he shot people through a window and outside the building, killing 4. A worshipper named Abdul Aziz heard the gunfire and ran outside. He saw Tarrant go back to his car to get another gun. Aziz picked up an empty shotgun that Tarrant had dropped and threw a payment terminal at him. Tarrant fired back. Aziz ran between parked cars and shouted, "I'm here," to draw Tarrant away from the building. Tarrant entered the mosque through the main door and shot 3 more people inside. When he came out again, Aziz confronted him. Tarrant pulled a bayonet from his vest, but did not use it. Instead, he got back in his car. At 1:55 p.m., Tarrant drove away from the Linwood Islamic Center. Aziz threw the empty shotgun at the car as it left. By that time, emergency calls had already been made. The first call from the Al-Noor Mosque came in at 1:41 p.m. Police units were dispatched and arrived near the mosque at 1:46 p.m. But Tarrant's car was hidden by a bus, and officers did not yet have a description of the vehicle. At 1:51 p.m., police arrived outside the Al-Noor Mosque and entered 3 minutes later. At 1:56 p.m., a member of the public flagged down a police car near the Linwood Islamic Center and reported shots fired. The first call from that location came in at 1:57 p.m. Tarrant, now driving away from Linwood, headed toward a third mosque in Ashburton, a town 90 kilometers south of Christchurch. He had told police later that he intended to attack there next. At 1:57 p.m., a police unit spotted a silver Subaru Outback matching the description of Tarrant's car. Officers began a pursuit. 2 police officers drove their vehicle into Tarrant's car, forcing it off the road on Brougham Street in the Christchurch suburb of Sydenham. At 1:59 p.m., officers arrested Tarrant without resistance. 18 minutes had passed since the first emergency call. When police searched his car, they found 4 incendiary devices. The New Zealand Defence Force later defused them. Officers also recovered the GoPro camera that had recorded the attacks. Inside the vehicle and at the crime scenes, police collected 6 firearms, used magazines, ammunition, and other equipment. Tarrant told officers at the scene that he had been driving to a third mosque in Ashburton to continue the attack. He also claimed there were 9 more shooters, and that others were planning attacks in Dunedin, Invercargill, and Ashburton. When interviewed later, he confirmed he had acted alone. The next day, March 16, 2019, Tarrant appeared in the Christchurch District Court. He was charged with 1 count of murder. The judge closed the courtroom to the public except for accredited media. Tarrant smiled at reporters and made a hand gesture that some interpreted as a white power symbol. The case was transferred to the High Court, and he was remanded in custody. He was later moved to the maximum security unit at Auckland Prison, the only facility of its kind in New Zealand. Over the following weeks, police continued their investigation. They reviewed the live-stream footage, Tarrant's manifesto, his online activity, and his travel history. On April 4, 2019, police announced that the total number of charges had increased to 89, 50 for murder and 39 for attempted murder. On May 20, 2019, a new charge was added, engaging in a terrorist act under the Terrorism Suppression Act 2002. 1 more murder charge and 1 more attempted murder charge were also added, bringing the final totals to 51 murders and 40 attempted murders. In June 2019, Tarrant appeared in the High Court via audiovisual link from prison. He pleaded not guilty to all charges. Mental health assessments had found him fit to plead and stand trial. A trial date was set for May 2020, later moved to June 2020 to avoid coinciding with the Islamic holy month of Ramadan. On March 26, 2020, Tarrant appeared again by audiovisual link. Because of the nationwide COVID-19 lockdown, the public was not allowed in the courtroom. Only reporters and representatives from the two mosques were present. Tarrant changed his pleas to guilty on all 92 charges. The judge convicted him and remanded him for sentencing. Sentencing began on August 24, 2020 before Justice Cameron Mander at the Christchurch High Court. The proceedings were televised. Tarrant had dismissed his lawyers and was representing himself, but he did not speak and did not oppose the sentence proposed. Crown prosecutors presented evidence of how Tarrant had meticulously planned the shootings. Over several days, survivors and relatives of the victims gave victim impact statements in court. They described their injuries, their losses, and the lasting pain caused by the attacks. On August 27, 2020, Justice Mander delivered the sentence. For each of the 51 murders, Tarrant was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. For the charge of engaging in a terrorist act, and for each of the 40 attempted murders, he received life imprisonment. The sentences were to be served concurrently. This was the first time a New Zealand court had imposed life imprisonment without parole, the maximum sentence available under New Zealand law. Justice Mander stated that Tarrant's crimes were so wicked that even if you are detained until you die, it will not exhaust the requirements of punishment and denunciation. After the sentencing, Tarrant was returned to Auckland Prison, where he remains. He is held in isolation due to security concerns. The 51 victims included people from many countries, 27 from New Zealand, 8 from Pakistan, 5 from India, 3 from Bangladesh, 2 from Fiji, and 1 each from Indonesia, Jordan, Malaysia, Mauritius, Palestine, and Turkey. The youngest victim was 3 years old. The oldest was 77. In the years following the attacks, a royal commission of inquiry investigated what happened and how it could have been prevented. The commission released its report in December 2020, making 44 recommendations to improve counterterrorism and security. The government agreed to implement them. Gun laws in New Zealand were changed, with a ban on military-style semi-automatic weapons and a buyback scheme for prohibited firearms. The story of Brenton Tarrant and the Christchurch mosque shootings ends with 51 innocent people dead, dozens more injured, and a nation changed by the deadliest terrorist attack in its modern history. Story 4. Nicholas Jacob Cruz was born on September 24, 1998, in Margate, Florida. His birth mother was Brenda Woodard. The identity of his biological father was never made public. Shortly after his birth, Nicholas was placed in an orphanage. He was then adopted by a couple named Roger and Linda Cruz. They raised him as their son. Roger and Linda already had a son, but they wanted to give Nicholas a home. For the first years of his life, Nicholas lived with his adoptive parents and his brother. The family lived in Broward County, Florida. From a very young age, Nicholas showed signs of trouble. According to records, he had behavioral problems as early as preschool. Teachers and caregivers noticed that he had difficulty following rules and interacting with other children. As Nicholas grew older, his struggles continued. He was evaluated by doctors and mental health professionals. One psychiatrist, Dr. Stephen E. Moskowitz, diagnosed him with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which is known as ADHD, and oppositional defiant disorder, which is known as ODD. These conditions made it hard for him to focus, control his impulses, and follow instructions from adults. Because of these issues, Nicholas was placed in special education programs at school. He had an individualized education program, or IEP, which was a plan designed to give him extra support in the classroom. His schooling was not stable. Over a period of 3 years, Nicholas was transferred between schools 6 times. In 2014, he was sent to a school that was meant for children with emotional or learning disabilities. During this time, there were reports that he made threats against other students. In 2016, he returned to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, a public high school in Parkland, Florida. He joined the Junior Reserve Officers Training Corps, which is often called JROTC. He also became a member of the school's varsity air rifle team. In JROTC, he received awards for academic achievement. While he had some success in that program, his behavior outside of class remained a concern. In September 2016, when Nicholas was 17 years old, he posted videos on Snapchat showing that he had cut his own arms. In those posts, he said he planned to buy a gun. A school resource officer, who was a sheriff's deputy assigned to the school, saw this information. The officer and 2 school counselors agreed that Nicholas should be placed under an involuntary psychiatric examination. This procedure was known as the Baker Act in Florida. However, a mental health facility did not admit him. The Florida Department of Children and Families investigated the situation. In their assessment, they wrote that Nicholas had depression, autism, and ADHD, and that he had tried to harm himself in the past. Despite this, they concluded he was at low risk of harming himself or others. Later, a different psychologist would testify that Nicholas was never actually diagnosed with autism. Nicholas's home life also became more difficult. His adoptive father, Roger Cruz, died in August 2004, when Nicholas was only 5 years old. His adoptive mother, Linda Cruz, raised him and his brother after that. But Linda's health declined over the years. She died on November 1st, 2017. At that time, Nicholas was 19 years old. He was still enrolled in high school because he had been held back twice. After Linda's death, Nicholas became an orphan. He went to live with relatives and friends. He was enrolled in a GED program, which is a way to earn a high school equivalency diploma, and he worked at a Dollar Tree store. During his last year at Stoneman Douglas High School, Nicholas's grades began to fall. He was a junior but was 18 years old. He met with education specialists along with his mother before she died. The specialists suggested that he transfer to another school called Cross Creek School, where he had done well before. Nicholas wanted to graduate with his class at Stoneman Douglas, so he refused to leave. He was told that if he stayed, he would no longer receive special education services. That information was later found to be incorrect. A few months later, his grades were so low that he withdrew from Stoneman Douglas. He then asked to go to Cross Creek, but the request was delayed because a new evaluation was needed, and eventually it was denied. Outside of school, Nicholas had a presence on social media that worried people who knew him. He posted pictures of himself with knives, a shotgun, a pistol, and a BB gun. He made comments online that used slurs against black people, Muslims, and other groups. He wrote about wanting to kill people and talked about weapons he owned. In one private Instagram chat, he said he hated Jews, niggers, immigrants. In that same chat, he said, "I think I am going to kill people," though later he claimed he was joking. He also expressed admiration for other mass killers and spent time reading about past school shootings on Wikipedia and watching documentaries. Neighbors and classmates noticed his behavior. A former classmate said Nicholas had anger problems and often joked about guns and shooting. A student who was at the school at the time later said that many students had thought if anyone would do something violent, it would be Nicholas. Another classmate said Nicholas told him he had been kicked out of 2 private schools, that he wanted to join the military, and that he enjoyed hunting. A neighbor said that Linda Cruz had called the police to the house multiple times to try to get help for her son. Law enforcement had been called to the Cruz home many times over the years. After the shooting, It was reported that from 2008 to 2017, there were at least 45 calls to the sheriff's office related to Nicholas, his brother, or the family home. In February 2016, an anonymous tip came in saying Nicholas had threatened to shoot up a school. In September 2016, a peer counselor told the school resource officer about Nicholas's suicide attempt and his plan to buy a gun. In November 2017, a tip said he might become a school shooter and that he collected knives and guns. In February 2017, when Nicholas was 18, he walked into a gun store in Coral Springs, Florida, and bought an AR-15 style semi-automatic rifle. He passed the background check required at the time, and the purchase was legal. Before that, he had already bought other firearms, including a shotgun and several rifles. In September 2017, a person who ran a YouTube channel saw a comment from an account named Nicholas Cruz under one of their videos. The comment read, "I'm going to be a professional school shooter." The channel owner reported the comment to the FBI. The FBI said later that they ran database checks but could not find the person who made the comment. On January 5, 2018, the FBI received another tip. A person who knew Nicholas called the FBI's public access line. The caller told the FBI about Nicholas's guns, his desire to kill people, his strange behavior, and his disturbing social media posts. The caller also said Nicholas might carry out a school shooting. The FBI later admitted that this information was not passed on to the Miami field office as it should have been. No investigation was started at that time. Nicholas continued to live with relatives and friends. By early February 2018, he was still enrolled in his GED program and still working at the Dollar Tree. He had not received mental health treatment in the year before. He had guns in his possession. He had made threats online. He had been reported to authorities multiple times. But no arrest had been made, and no formal action had been taken to remove his firearms or to place him in a secure facility. On the morning of February 14, 2018, Nicholas Cruz woke up and prepared to carry out an attack he had been thinking about for some time. He later told a psychologist that he chose Valentine's Day because he believed no one loved him. He wanted to cause as much harm as possible on a day that was supposed to be about love. Cruz had with him a semi-automatic AR-15 style rifle. He had purchased this rifle legally 1 year earlier, when he was 18 years old. He also carried multiple loaded magazines. One of the magazines had a swastika carved into it. He put the rifle and the magazines inside a black soft-sided gun case. He also wore a burgundy shirt, dark pants, and a hat. He placed the gun case over his shoulder and walked to a ride-sharing service car that he had called to his location. The ride-sharing driver picked Cruz up and drove him toward Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. Cruz got out of the car near the school campus. It was about 2:19 in the afternoon. School was still in session. Students were moving between classes or were in their classrooms. Cruz walked toward a building called the Freshman Building, also known as Building 12. He entered the building through a ground floor entrance. He went to a stairwell and removed his rifle from the gun case. He began firing on the first floor. Students and staff heard the shots and tried to hide, run, or lock themselves in classrooms. Cruz moved methodically from the first floor to the second floor and then to the third floor. He walked through hallways and fired through doorways and windows of locked classrooms. He used the rifle to shoot at students and teachers. He fired into rooms where people were crouching behind desks or hiding in closets. He reloaded multiple times using the magazines he had brought. Over the course of approximately 6 to 7 minutes, he fired more than 100 rounds. 17 people were killed. 14 were students. 3 were staff members. Their names were Alyssa Alhadeff, Scott Beigel, Martin Duque, Nicholas Dworet, Aaron Faze, Jamie Gutenberg, Chris Hickson, Luke Hoyer, Cara Loughran, Gina Montalto, Joaquin Oliver, Elena Petty, Meadow Pollock, Helena Ramsey, Alex Schachter, Carmen Skentrup, and Peter Wong. 17 other people were wounded by gunfire. Many of the wounded suffered serious injuries that required surgery and long recovery. During the shooting, a few staff members and students took actions to try to protect others. One coach, Aaron Faze, shielded students and was killed. One teacher, Scott Beigel, unlocked a classroom door to let students in and was shot while closing the door behind them. Another student, Peter Wong, was last seen holding a door open to help others escape before he was shot. After finishing his attack, Cruz dropped his rifle and ran down the stairs. He took off his hat and his burgundy shirt. He blended in with the crowd of students who were fleeing the building. He walked away from the school grounds and went to a nearby Walmart. He bought a drink at the store. Then he walked to a Subway restaurant. He walked along a street in Coral Springs. About 1 hour and 20 minutes after the shooting, a police officer spotted Cruz walking. The officer recognized him from descriptions that had been broadcast. Cruz was taken into custody without any resistance. He was placed in a police car and brought to the Broward County Sheriff's Office. When questioned by detectives, Cruz admitted that he was the shooter. He told them he had brought extra loaded magazines in a backpack. He also said he had planned the attack. After his confession, he was held in a jail facility. He was placed on suicide watch and kept in an isolated cell. After Nicholas Cruz was taken into custody, investigators returned to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School to secure the scene. Crime scene technicians from the Broward Sheriff's Office and the FBI spent hours inside Building 12. They marked the locations where each victim fell. They collected spent bullet casings, fired bullets, and the rifle Cruz had dropped. They also recovered the loaded magazines he had left behind, including one with a swastika carved into it. The physical evidence matched the path Cruz had described during his confession. The investigation confirmed that he had acted alone and that he had fired more than 100 rounds. On the day after the shooting, February 15, 2018, Cruz appeared in court for his first arraignment. He was formally charged with 17 counts of premeditated murder. The judge ordered that he be held without bond. Because of the nature of the crimes and concerns for his safety, he was placed in an isolation cell under suicide watch. On March 7, 2018, a grand jury returned a superseding indictment. Cruz was now charged with 17 counts of first-degree murder and 17 counts of attempted first-degree murder, for a total of 34 charges. The state attorney's office filed notice that they intended to seek the death penalty. Cruz was initially represented by the Broward County Public Defender's Office. However, a legal issue arose regarding his eligibility for a public defender. After his mother's death, Cruz and his half-brother became beneficiaries of a life insurance policy worth over $860,000. In April 2019, a court determined that Cruz would receive money from that policy. Because he had assets, the public defender's office asked to withdraw from the case. The judge granted that request, and Cruz was later represented by private counsel paid by the state at a reduced rate. Over the next several years, the case moved slowly through the court system. The judge, Elizabeth Scherer, presided over pretrial hearings. The defense asked her to step aside from the case, claiming she showed favoritism toward the prosecution, but she denied that request. Cruz's legal team filed motions to suppress his confession and to prevent the release of certain evidence. The judge ruled that the confession could be used at trial, and in August 2019, a video of Cruz confessing was made public. The trial date was postponed multiple times. Delays came from the complexity of the case, the need for extensive mental health evaluations, and later the COVID-19 pandemic. On October 20, 2021, Cruz appeared in court and pleaded guilty to all 34 charges. He stood before the judge and admitted to each murder and each attempted murder. By pleading guilty, he waived his right to a jury trial on the question of guilt. However, the state did not drop its pursuit of the death penalty. The case would now move to a penalty phase, where a jury would decide whether Cruz should be sentenced to death or to life in prison without parole. The penalty trial began on July 18, 2022. The jury was tasked with hearing evidence from both sides. The prosecution presented evidence to prove aggravating factors that made the crimes eligible for the death penalty. They showed the jury Cruz's detailed planning, the large number of victims, and the cruelty of the attack. They also introduced his internet search history from before the shooting, which included searches related to school shootings, violence against women, and racist and hateful material. The prosecution called survivors and family members of the victims to testify about the impact of the shootings. The defense presented evidence meant to show mitigating circumstances. They called mental health experts who testified that Cruz had suffered brain damage from prenatal exposure to alcohol and drugs. They argued that his birth mother's substance use during pregnancy, combined with a history of behavioral disorders and the early death of his adoptive parents, shaped his development. The defense also argued that the school system and mental health agencies had failed to provide him with adequate treatment over the years. After the defense rested, the prosecution called rebuttal witnesses. A prosecution expert testified that Cruz did not actually have fetal alcohol syndrome and that he had feigned some symptoms during evaluations. That expert diagnosed him with antisocial personality disorder and borderline personality disorder. The prosecution also presented additional internet searches from Cruz's accounts that showed he had looked at disturbing content while in jail awaiting trial. Closing arguments were delivered on October 11, 2022. The jury then began deliberations. On October 13, 2022, the jury announced its recommendation. Under Florida law at the time, a death sentence required a unanimous vote from the jury. The jurors found that the prosecution had proved the aggravating factors beyond a reasonable doubt. However, they did not unanimously agree that those aggravating factors outweighed the mitigating factors presented by the defense. Because the vote was not unanimous, the jury recommended a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. On November 2, 2022, Judge Scherer formally sentenced Nicholas Cruz. She imposed 34 consecutive life sentences, one for each count of murder and attempted murder. She stated that he would never be eligible for release. In the months after the sentencing, Florida changed its law regarding the death penalty. Governor Ron DeSantis signed a bill in April 2023 that allowed a jury to recommend death with a vote of 8-4, rather than requiring unanimity. The change came after criticism of the jury's decision in Cruz's case. In June 2024, a civil lawsuit brought by one of the shooting victims, Anthony Borges, was settled. Borges had been wounded in the attack and suffered severe injuries. As part of the settlement, Cruz agreed to transfer control of his name and publicity rights to Borges. This meant Cruz could not grant interviews or make deals with filmmakers or authors without Borges's permission. Cruz also agreed that after his death, his brain would be donated for scientific research. Nicholas Cruz remains incarcerated at a Florida state prison, where he will serve the remainder of his life with no chance of parole. Story 5. Devin Patrick Kelly was born on February 12, 1991. He grew up in New Braunfels, Texas, a town about 35 miles from Sutherland Springs. His parents owned a property there, and Devin lived with them during his childhood and young adult years. He attended New Braunfels High School. His school record shows 7 suspensions. The reasons included falsifying records, insubordination, using profanity, and a drug-related offense. A former classmate later said Devin was an outcast but not a loner. He had friends, but they were also students who did not fit in with the larger groups. A martial arts instructor who taught Devin during those years said Devin had signed up for the class because other students bullied him. The instructor also said Devin did not seem to belong anywhere easily. Devin graduated from high school in 2009. His grade point average was 2.32, and he ranked 260 out of 393 students in his class. A close friend from middle school and high school later recalled that Devin was not always a troubled person, but over time they saw him change into someone different. After graduation, Devin enlisted in the United States Air Force. He first trained to become a fusion analyst, but he did not complete that training. In 2011, he was assigned to a logistics readiness role at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. That same year, he married his first wife. By 2012, his work performance became very poor. His supervisors began collecting paperwork to discharge him because he did not meet the standards. In October of that year, he was charged with assaulting his wife and with fracturing the skull of his toddler stepson. When his superior officers brought these charges, Devin made death threats against them. He also tried to bring firearms onto the Air Force Base without permission. Around the same time, Devin told a co-worker that he wanted to harm himself. He was sent to Peak Behavioral Health Services, a mental health facility in Santa Teresa, New Mexico. In June 2012, he ran away from that facility. He was caught about 10 miles away at a bus station in El Paso, Texas. While he was staying at the facility, he told staff that he wanted revenge against his chain of command. He also used computers there to order weapons and tactical gear, which he had sent to a post office box in San Antonio. His first wife divorced him in October 2012. Later she described their marriage as filled with abuse. She said he once threatened her with a gun over a speeding ticket and later threatened to kill her and her entire family. Devin faced a general court-martial. He was charged with assault on his wife, aggravated assault on his stepson, and several weapons charges that involved pointing guns at his wife. In November 2012, he pleaded guilty to the 2 assault charges. In exchange, the weapons charges were dropped. He was sentenced to 12 months in confinement, and his rank was reduced to the lowest level. He tried to appeal but failed. In 2014, he was dismissed from the Air Force with a bad conduct discharge. After his release, Devin returned to New Braunfels and lived in a converted barn on his parents' property. In 2013, a different woman accused him of sexual assault and rape. She gave a detailed statement about an attack. The Comal County Sheriff's Office investigated, but the case became inactive when the woman did not respond to follow-up calls and messages. Around that time, Devin's first wife also provided a statement about the abuse she had suffered. She wrote that for a whole year he slapped her, choked her, kicked her, waterboarded her, and held a gun to her head. In April 2014, Devin married his second wife. They moved to a mobile home in Colorado Springs, Colorado. In August 2014, he was charged with misdemeanor cruelty to animals. He had beaten his husky dog, which was malnourished. He received a deferred sentence and was ordered to pay restitution. The charge was dismissed in March 2016 after he completed the terms of his probation. In January 2015, a resident of El Paso County, Colorado, obtained a protection order against him. By the time of the events that followed, Devin was again living at his parents' property in New Braunfels. He found work as an unarmed security guard at Schlitterbahn Water Park and Resort, but he was fired after less than 6 weeks. Later he worked as a security worker at the Summit Vacation and RV Resort in New Braunfels. A family who met him there said he seemed angry and annoyed and acted as if he wanted to show authority over them. Devin's second wife sometimes attended the First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs with her family. Devin himself had attended a different church in Kingsville, Texas, for a short time in 2014 and had volunteered one day for a summer Bible class. After that, he stopped volunteering and began posting anti-Christian messages online. He called people who believed in God stupid. He expressed interest in church shootings. Many former classmates removed him from their social media because of his posts and hateful speech. A former Air Force colleague reconnected with him online for a short time. Devin told her he bought dogs and other animals and used them for target practice. He also talked about mass murders, including the Charleston church shooting, and joked about committing a mass shooting himself. She blocked him on Facebook because of those comments. In the days before the attack, Devin sent threatening text messages to the mother of his estranged second wife. On the night of October 31st, 2017, he attended a festival at the First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs. He wore all black. 2 church members noticed him and said he acted so strangely that they kept watching him. One of them checked to make sure he was not carrying a firearm. Because of his 2012 court-martial conviction for domestic assault, federal law prohibited Devin from owning or buying firearms. But the Air Force had not reported his conviction to the federal background check system. As a result, between 2014 and 2017, he was able to purchase 4 guns from stores in Colorado and Texas without being stopped. In the days before November 5th, 2017, Devin Kelley had been sending threatening text messages to the mother of his estranged second wife. His wife sometimes attended the First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs with her family. On the morning of November 5th, his wife and her mother were not at the church, but his wife's grandmother was inside. On October 29th, just over a week before, Kelley had posted a photograph on his Facebook profile. The photograph showed a Ruger AR-556 rifle. That was the same model of rifle he would later use in the attack. At around 11 a.m. on November 5th, Kelley drove a white SUV to the First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs. The church was holding its regular Sunday service. Kelley parked the SUV and stepped out. He was wearing black tactical gear, a ballistic vest, and a black face mask that had a white skull design on it. He carried the Ruger AR-556 semi-automatic rifle. He approached the church from the right side. First he fired at 2 people who were outside the church. He killed them both. Then he continued firing at the building itself. After that, he went through a side door on the right and entered the sanctuary where the worshipers were sitting. Once inside, Kelley yelled, "Everybody dies, motherfuckers!" He walked up and down the center aisle. He shot at people sitting in the wooden pews. He moved methodically, pausing only to reload his rifle. A camera had been set up at the back of the church to record services for uploading online. That camera was running and captured the entire shooting. Police later found 15 empty magazines at the scene. Each magazine was capable of holding 30 rounds. Investigators calculated that Kelley fired approximately 450 rounds during the attack. The shooting lasted about 11 minutes. 26 people died. The victims included 10 women, 7 men, 6 girls, 2 boys, and 1 unborn child. 23 died inside the church. 2 died outside. 1 died later in a hospital. The oldest victim was 77 years old. The youngest was a 1-year-old boy. 1 victim was the 14-year-old daughter of the church's pastor. The pastor was not at the church that day. Another victim was a visiting pastor named Brian Holcomb. He died along with 8 members of his family, including an unborn grandchild. Kelley killed his estranged wife's grandmother during the attack. 22 other people were wounded. Some were shot multiple times. 1 victim was shot twice and became paralyzed from the waist down. While Kelley was still inside the church, a local resident named Stephen Williford heard the gunfire from his home across the street. Williford was a former firearms instructor. He took his own AR-15 semi-automatic rifle and went outside. He took cover behind a truck that was parked across the street from the church. When Kelly came out of the church, Williford fired at him. He hit Kelly twice. One bullet struck Kelly in the leg. The other hit him in the upper left side of his torso, under his tactical gear. Kelly dropped his rifle during the exchange. He pulled out a handgun and fired back at Williford. Then he ran to his white SUV and drove away. Williford fired one more shot as Kelly sped north. A man named Johnny Langendorf was driving his pickup truck near the intersection of 4th Street and Farm to Market Road 539. He saw Kelly's SUV speed past. He also saw Williford run to the intersection. Williford got into Langendorf's truck on the passenger side, and Langendorf began driving after Kelly. They chased Kelly at high speed for about 5 to 7 minutes. At times they drove up to 95 miles per hour. While they were chasing, they called police dispatch and reported the route and direction so officers could respond. During the chase, Kelly used his phone to call his wife and his parents. He told them he had just shot up the Sutherland Springs Church. He told his father that he was injured and did not think he would survive. He repeated several times that he was sorry. Kelly was losing blood from his wounds. He lost control of his SUV, hit a road sign, crossed a ditch, and came to a stop in a field. Williford and Langendorf pulled up and saw that Kelly was motionless. Police arrived and took over the scene. Inside Kelly's vehicle, police found 2 handguns, a Glock 19 9mm and a Ruger SR 22-22 caliber. Kelly had 3 gunshot wounds on his body. One of them was a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. He was dead. When police arrived at the field where Devin Kelly's SUV had stopped, they found him dead inside. Stephen Williford and Johnny Langendorf had already called dispatch and were waiting nearby. Officers secured the scene and began documenting what they saw. The chase had ended quickly, and because Kelly was dead, there was no arrest. The Texas Rangers took the lead in the investigation. The Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives assisted. Investigators went through the church, the vehicles, and Kelly's home. They collected the firearms, the magazines, and the tactical gear. They reviewed the church's recording of the service, which showed the entire attack. They also examined Kelly's phone records and his social media activity. As investigators looked into Kelly's background, they discovered that he had been convicted of domestic assault in a court-martial in 2012. That conviction should have made it illegal for him to buy any firearm. Federal law prohibits anyone convicted of domestic violence, even a misdemeanor, from possessing guns. But when Kelly bought the Ruger AR-556 rifle from an Academy Sports and Outdoors store in San Antonio in April 2016, he filled out the required form and falsely stated he had no disqualifying criminal history. The background check came back clear because the Air Force had never reported his conviction to the federal database. One day after the shooting, the Air Force issued a statement admitting the oversight. The Air Force said that the conviction had not been entered into the National Crime Information Center database by the Office of Special Investigations at Holloman Air Force Base. The Air Force announced it had launched a review of how it handled Kelly's criminal records. 3 days after the shooting, Vice President Mike Pence visited the church in Sutherland Springs. He said the federal government would find out why the information was not properly recorded and would work with Congress to make sure it never happened again. The investigation by the Texas Rangers determined that the shooting was not motivated by race or religion. Instead, the motive was tied to Kelly's anger toward his estranged wife and her family. His wife's mother had received threatening text messages from him before the attack, and his wife's grandmother was among the victims. In 2018, the family of a couple who were murdered in the shooting filed a lawsuit against the United States Air Force and the Department of Defense. The lawsuit stated that the federal government was negligent for failing to report Kelly's criminal history, which would have prevented him from purchasing firearms. The case was heard in the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Texas. In 2021, U.S. District Judge Xavier Rodriguez ruled that the federal government's negligence was mostly responsible for the shooting. The judge found that if Kelly's conviction had been reported, he would not have been able to buy the rifle he used. The judge ruled that the government was jointly and severally liable for the damages. Later that year, the judge awarded more than $230 million to the survivors and the families of the victims. While the lawsuit was moving through the courts, members of Congress worked on legislation to fix the gaps in the background check system. On November 15, 2017, Senator John Cornyn of Texas introduced the Fix NICS Act. The bill required federal agencies to report relevant conviction records to the background check system and imposed penalties for agencies that failed to do so. A version of the bill passed as part of a larger spending package, and President Donald Trump signed it into law on March 23, 2018. A week later, Senator Cornyn returned to the First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs to meet with survivors and victims' families and explain what the new law would do. By the end of March 2018, the Air Force had turned over more than 4,000 outstanding records to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. In the years after the shooting, the church building was kept as a memorial. A new, larger church was built next to it. Over time, the congregation decided that the original building was a painful reminder of the attack. In 2021, they voted to remove it. Some families of the victims objected and filed a lawsuit to stop the demolition. In July 2024, a judge issued a temporary order to halt the demolition, but later another judge denied a request to extend that order. On August 12, 2024, crews began taking down the building. The investigation into the shooting concluded without any other suspects. Because Kelly died by suicide at the scene, there was no criminal trial. The civil case against the federal government resulted in a monetary award for the victims, and the Fix NICS Act changed how domestic violence convictions are reported across the country. The community of Sutherland Springs continued to mourn the 26 people who lost their lives, and the survivors carried the physical and emotional wounds of that mourning for the rest of their lives. Story 6. Tamerlan Anzorovich Tsarnaev was born on October 21, 1986, in a place called the Kalmyk Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic. At that time, this area was part of the Soviet Union. His family was from the Chechen and Avar ethnic groups. His father, Anzor Tsarnaev, was Chechen. His mother, Zabaydat Tsarneva, was Avar. The family had 2 daughters and 2 sons. Tamerlan was the older son. His younger brother, Jakar, was born on July 22, 1993. The Tsarnaev family did not stay in one place for long. Years before Tamerlan was born, the family had been moved by the Soviet government from Chechnya to Kyrgyzstan. So when Tamerlan was a child, the family lived in a city called Tokmak in Kyrgyzstan. They raised their children as Muslims. In 2001, when Tamerlan was about 15 years old, the family moved again. This time they went to Makhachkala, a city in Dagestan, which is part of Russia. They lived there for about 1 year. Then, in April 2002, Tamerlan's parents and his younger brother Jakar traveled to the United States on tourist visas. They decided to stay. His father applied for asylum, saying he feared persecution because of his Chechen background. Tamerlan did not go with them right away. He stayed behind in Kyrgyzstan and was cared for by his uncle Ruslin. About 2 years later, in 2003, Tamerlan joined his family in the United States. He received his visa at the American consulate in Ankara, Turkey, and then traveled to America. The family settled in Cambridge, Massachusetts, on Norfolk Street. In March 2007, the whole family was granted legal permanent residence. Tamerlan became a lawful permanent resident of the United States. He also held citizenship in Russia and Kyrgyzstan. When Tamerlan arrived in the U.S., he attended Cambridge Rindge and Latin School, a public high school. After high school, he wanted to continue his education. He applied to the University of Massachusetts, Boston in 2006, but was not accepted. Instead, he went to Bunker Hill Community College. He attended part-time for 3 terms between 2006 and 2008. He studied accounting because he hoped to become an engineer. But during that time, he became more interested in boxing. Eventually, he dropped out of college to focus on boxing full-time. Boxing became a big part of his life. He trained hard and hoped to compete for the U.S. Olympic team. He told a reporter in 2010 that he wanted to become a naturalized citizen so he could try out for the Olympics. He said he would rather compete for the United States than for Russia. But later, rule changes meant that only U.S. citizens could compete in the Golden Gloves boxing tournament. Because Tamerlan was not yet a citizen, he could no longer compete. This ended his boxing career and his Olympic hopes. In 2008, Tamerlan's mother became concerned about his behavior. She saw that he was drinking alcohol, smoking, and pursuing women. She urged him to embrace Islam more seriously. She told him to read about it on the internet. Around this time, Tamerlan started attending a mosque near his home in Cambridge called the Islamic Society of Boston. He also began to change his lifestyle. He later said he stopped drinking and smoking because God says no to alcohol. In July 2009, Tamerlan was arrested at his home in Cambridge. The charge was aggravated domestic assault and battery against his girlfriend at the time. The case later went to court, but it was dismissed. The prosecutors did not pursue it, so no conviction was recorded. Tamerlan had been dating a woman named Catherine Russell. They met in 2007, while she was a student at Suffolk University. Their relationship was not always calm. Friends later said that Tamerlan would become angry and sometimes throw things during fights. He was also known to be unfaithful to her. Despite this, the relationship continued on and off for several years. In 2008, Catherine converted to Islam at Tamerlan's insistence. She began wearing a hijab and took the name Karima. In the spring of 2010, Catherine became pregnant with Tamerlan's child. She dropped out of college near the end of her junior year. On June 21, 2010, Tamerlan and Catherine were married in a short ceremony at a mosque in the Dorchester area of Boston. Their daughter was born in October 2010. During this time, Tamerlan was becoming more serious about his religion. In a 2010 interview, he said he did not understand Americans and did not have American friends. He said there were no values anymore, and people could not control themselves. He also said he abstained from drinking and smoking. In early 2011, the Russian government contacted the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or FBI. Russian authorities said that Tamerlan was a follower of Islamic extremism. They said he was planning to leave the United States and travel to Russia to join underground groups. The FBI looked into this. Agents interviewed Tamerlan and some of his relatives. They did not find any evidence of terrorist activity at that time. The FBI asked the Russians for more information, but the Russians did not respond. So the FBI closed the case. Tamerlan's mother later said that FBI agents had told her they feared her son was becoming an extremist leader. She said the FBI was controlling his movements, but the FBI denied that. Later in 2011, the Central Intelligence Agency, or CIA, added Tamerlan's name to a database called the Terrorist Identities Datamart Environment. His mother's name was also added to this database. Russian intelligence had recorded a phone call in which Tamerlan and his mother vaguely discussed jihad. They also found text messages in which his mother talked about Tamerlan being ready to die for Islam. In January 2012, Tamerlan traveled to Russia. He flew into Moscow and then went to Dagestan. He stayed there for several months. His father arrived in May of that year. During this time, Tamerlan was seen visiting a mosque in Makhachkala. He was also reportedly seen with people who were known to be part of the Islamist underground. One of those people was a cousin of his mother named Magomed Kardashov, who led an Islamist organization. Russian security sources later said Tamerlan tried to join the local insurgency, but he left Russia in July 2012 after some of his contacts were killed. When Tamerlan returned to the United States on July 17, 2012, he looked different. He had grown a long, thick beard. He also wore kohl, a black substance, around his eyes. He saw this as a sign of religious devotion. After his return, his life took on a stricter religious tone. He created a YouTube channel and posted links to videos by Islamist militants. He also read extremist websites and online magazines. In September 2012, Tamerlan applied for U.S. citizenship, but the Department of Homeland Security held up his application for extra review. They had found a record of the FBI interview from 2011, and they wanted to look into it further. In November 2012, Tamerlan got into a dispute at a grocery store near the mosque. He saw a sign advertising Thanksgiving turkeys. He told the shopkeeper that the sign was wrong because it was non-Muslim. That same month, he also challenged a speaker during a sermon at the mosque. The speaker had said that Muslims could celebrate July 4th and Thanksgiving. Tamerlan stood up and objected. The mosque leaders later asked him not to return unless he stopped shouting during sermons. In January 2013, Tamerlan again caused a disturbance at the mosque. It was a sermon for Martin Luther King Jr. Day. The speaker compared Muhammad to Martin Luther King Jr., and Tamerlan objected loudly. Members of the congregation shouted him down. After this, the mosque told him he was not welcome back unless he could be quiet during services. By this time, Tamerlan was living with his wife and young daughter in the same Norfolk Street house in Cambridge where his parents had lived. His mother had moved back to Russia. His father was also in Russia. His younger brother Jakar was living nearby and attending college. On February 6, 2013, Tamerlan Tsarnaev went to a store in Seabrook, New Hampshire. He purchased 48 mortars. These devices contained explosive powder. He brought them back to Cambridge. Then, on April 14, 2013, he received a package in the mail. Inside were electronic components used for making improvised explosive devices, or IEDs. He had ordered these parts online. He now had the materials he needed. Tamerlan and his younger brother Jakar worked together to build 2 bombs. They used pressure cookers as the outer shells. They packed explosive powder inside along with shrapnel, pieces of metal and other materials meant to cause harm. They attached the electronic components so the bombs could be detonated remotely. The brothers learned how to make these bombs by reading an online magazine called Inspire, which was published by Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. On April 15, 2013, the brothers carried the 2 bombs to Boylston Street in Boston. The Boston Marathon was being held that day. Thousands of people were gathered along the street to watch the race. Tamerlan and Jakar each carried a backpack containing one of the bombs. They walked to the finish line area. At 2:49 p.m., the first bomb exploded near the finish line. People were knocked to the ground. Smoke filled the air. Screaming began. About 10 seconds later, the second bomb exploded about a block away, outside a restaurant called the Forum. The bombs were timed to go off when the area was most crowded with runners, spectators, and families. 3 people died from the explosions. Crystal Campbell was a 29-year-old woman from Arlington, Massachusetts. She had gone to watch the marathon with a friend. Lu Lingzi was a 23-year-old graduate student from China. She was studying at Boston University. Martin Richard was an 8-year-old boy from the Dorchester neighborhood of Boston. He was standing with his mother and sister when the second bomb exploded. His sister lost a leg, and his mother suffered serious injuries. Hundreds of other people were hurt. Many lost limbs. Some suffered hearing loss, burns, and wounds from the shrapnel. The explosions sent metal fragments into bodies. Doctors at Boston hospitals worked through the night to treat the wounded. Some victims required multiple surgeries. In the moments after the bombs went off, the Tsarnaev brothers did not run away immediately. They stayed in the crowd and watched what happened. Then they walked away calmly. They had been wearing backpacks, and witnesses later remembered seeing them. For the next 3 days, the city of Boston was on high alert. Police and federal agents searched for whoever had planted the bombs. Hospitals treated the wounded. The families of the dead began to mourn. On the evening of April 18, 2013, the Federal Bureau of Investigation released photographs of 2 suspects. The photos had been taken from surveillance cameras along Boylston Street. The images showed 2 young men carrying backpacks. The FBI asked the public to help identify them. When Tamerlan and Jakar saw the photographs, they knew they had been identified. They went to the family apartment on Norfolk Street in Cambridge. At the apartment, they gathered weapons and more explosives. They took a semi-automatic handgun, ammunition, a machete, and 5 improvised explosive devices that were like grenades. That same night, just after 10:25 p.m., the brothers drove to the campus of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. They found a police car parked near Building 32. Inside the car was Sean A. Collier, a 27-year-old police officer who worked for the MIT Police Department. Officer Collier was sitting in his car. The brothers approached. They shot him 6 times. He died shortly after. The brothers tried to take his gun from his holster, but the holster had a security system that kept the gun locked in place. They could not free it. After killing Officer Collier, the brothers drove to the Allston-Brighton neighborhood of Boston. There they found a Mercedes-Benz Sport Utility Vehicle, or SUV. The driver was a young Chinese man named Dun Meng. Tamerlan approached the driver's side door. He pointed a gun at Meng and forced him out of the driver's seat. Tamerlan got behind the wheel. He told Meng that he was the one who had bombed the Boston Marathon and that he had killed the police officer at MIT. He took Meng hostage in the back seat. Jakar followed in the brothers' own car, a green Honda Civic. Later, Jakar abandoned the Civic and joined his brother in the Mercedes. The brothers forced Meng to give them his ATM cards and his personal identification number, or PIN. They drove to several ATMs and took out $800 in cash. They told Meng they were planning to drive to New York City and bomb Times Square. They drove to a gas station on Memorial Drive in Cambridge to buy gasoline for the long trip. Jakar went inside the gas station to pay for food and fuel. While he was inside, Meng saw a chance to escape. He unbuckled his seatbelt, opened the door of the Mercedes, and ran across the street to another gas station. He told the clerk there to call 911. Meng's cell phone was still in the Mercedes. The police used that phone to track the vehicle. The brothers drove the Mercedes into Watertown, a town just west of Cambridge. Police officers in Watertown spotted the car. A shootout began in the streets. Tamerlan and Jakar fired 56 rounds at the police officers. They also threw explosives. They had at least 1 pressure cooker bomb with them, which they detonated. They threw 5 of the improvised grenades. 3 of them exploded. The police returned fire. The gun battle went on for several minutes. Tamerlan was hit by bullets. He was wounded in the torso and extremities. He ran out of ammunition. When his gun was empty, he threw it at one of the police officers. The officer, a sergeant, tackled Tamerlan to the ground. Another officer came to help hold him down. At that moment, Jakar was still in the Mercedes. He drove the vehicle directly toward his brother and the police officers. The officers tried to pull Tamerlan out of the way, but they could not move him quickly enough. The SUV struck Tamerlan. He was pulled under the car and dragged along the ground. The car dragged him for about 20 yards before his body came free. He was left lying in the street with severe injuries. His chest and face were crushed. The right side of his upper body was torn open from being dragged between the ground and the bottom of the car. The police officers then captured Tamerlan. He was still alive but gravely wounded. An ambulance arrived, and paramedics put him on a stretcher. As they drove to Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, Tamerlan resisted. He lifted himself from the stretcher and screamed. Despite the doctor's efforts to revive him, he died at 1:35 a.m. on April 19, 2013. His death certificate stated the cause of death as gunshot wounds to the torso and extremities, plus blunt trauma to the head and torso. Jakar escaped in the chaos. He fled in the Mercedes and later abandoned it. A massive manhunt began. The city of Boston and its suburbs were locked down. Residents were told to stay in their homes while police searched door to door. After the shootout in Watertown on the night of April 18th and early morning of April 19th, 2013, Jakar Tsarnaev was not in police custody. He had driven away in the stolen Mercedes SUV, while his brother Tamerlan lay wounded in the street. Police set up a massive search. The entire city of Boston and the surrounding towns were placed under a lockdown. Residents were told to stay inside with their doors locked. Thousands of police officers went door to door in Watertown and neighboring areas. For nearly 20 hours, Jakar was not found. He had abandoned the Mercedes in Watertown and fled on foot. He made his way to a residential street named Franklin Street. A man who lived there had parked his boat in his backyard. The boat was covered with a tarp. Jakar climbed into the boat and hid underneath the tarp. He had been shot during the shootout and was bleeding. He lay there for the rest of the day. On the evening of April 19th, a resident of Franklin Street went outside to check on his boat. He noticed the tarp was loose and looked disturbed. He lifted a corner of the tarp and saw a person lying inside covered in blood. The resident quickly stepped back and called 911. Police surrounded the boat. Jakar was still inside. A police negotiator spoke with him, and after some time he surrendered. He was taken into custody and brought to a hospital for treatment of his wounds. Once Jakar was in custody, federal investigators began to question him. He told them that he and his brother had acted together. He said they built the bombs using instructions from the Inspire magazine. He admitted to placing one of the pressure cooker bombs near the finish line. He also said they had planned to drive to New York City and detonate explosives in Times Square, but they changed their plans after the carjacking and shootout. The investigation gathered evidence from many sources. Surveillance footage from the marathon showed the brothers walking with backpacks. Investigators found bomb fragments at the scene. They found residue from the pressure cookers and the explosive powder. They traced the components back to the store in New Hampshire where Tamerlan had bought the mortars. They also found the electronic parts that Tamerlan had ordered online. Jakar's own words during questioning confirmed his involvement. Investigators also looked into the 2011 triple murder in Waltham, Massachusetts. 3 men, Eric Weissman, Raphael Tikin, and Brendan Mess, had been killed on September 11, 2011. Their throats were cut, and marijuana was spread over their bodies. Tamerlan had been friends with Brendan Mess. Investigators found evidence suggesting Tamerlan may have been involved, and Jakar may have known about it. However, because Tamerlan was dead, no charges were ever filed for that crime. It remained part of the background investigation, but was not part of the trial for the marathon bombing. Jakar Tsarnaev was charged with 30 criminal counts related to the Boston Marathon bombing and the events that followed. The charges included using a weapon of mass destruction resulting in death, conspiracy, and the murder of Officer Sean Collier. The trial began on March 4, 2015, in federal court in Boston. During the trial, prosecutors presented the evidence step by step. They showed the jury the surveillance images of the two brothers. They brought witnesses who had been injured in the bombings. They played video of the explosions. They showed the jury the fragments of the pressure cookers. Jakar's own lawyers did not argue that he was innocent. Instead, they told the jury that he was involved, but they argued that he was following his older brother's lead. They said Tamerlan was the driving force behind the plot. The jury listened to the evidence for several weeks. On April 8, 2015, the jury found Jakar Tsarnaev guilty on all 30 counts. 17 of those counts carried the possibility of the death penalty. The same jury then heard additional testimony to decide whether Jakar should be sentenced to death or to life in prison without parole. On May 15, 2015, the jury recommended the death penalty. The judge formally sentenced Jakar Tsarnaev to death. He was also ordered to pay restitution to the victims. He was sent to a federal prison in Colorado where inmates on death row are held. After the trial, Jakar's lawyers filed appeals. The case moved through the federal court system. In 2020, a federal appeals court overturned the death sentence, saying the judge had not done enough to ensure the jury was unbiased. The case was sent back for a new sentencing hearing. In 2022, the United States Supreme Court agreed to review the case. In 2024, the Supreme Court upheld the death sentence, reinstating it. As of the final closure of this case, Jakar Tsarnaev remains on federal death row while further legal proceedings continue. Tamerlan Tsarnaev's body was held at a funeral home for several days. Officials in Boston, Cambridge, and other cities refused to allow it to be buried in their jurisdictions. A woman from Richmond, Virginia, arranged for the burial. In early May 2013, Tamerlan was buried in a small Muslim cemetery called Al-Barzak Cemetery in Doswell, Virginia. The burial was done quietly, and the exact location was not publicly disclosed at the time. Tamerlan's widow, Catherine Russell, was not charged with any crime. Investigators found that she had searched online for topics about the rewards for the wife of a martyr, but they did not find enough evidence to charge her. She returned to living with her family, and later moved to another state with her daughter. The 3 people killed in the bombings were mourned by their families and by the city of Boston. Crystal Campbell, Lou Lindsay, and Martin Richard were honored in memorials. Many of the injured recovered, though some faced lifelong disabilities. The city held a memorial service and later built a memorial near the finish line with 3 granite stones to honor the victims. The Boston Marathon continued each year, and the event became a symbol of the city's resilience. The investigation and trial concluded the legal process for the crimes committed by the Tsarnaev brothers. One brother died in the immediate aftermath of his actions, and the other was convicted and sentenced to death for his role in the bombing and the killing of Officer Sean Collier. Story 7. Randy Robert Stair was born on September 17, 1992. He grew up in Dallas, Pennsylvania, a small town in the northeastern part of the state. He lived in a house with his parents and his younger brother. His family stayed together, and he continued living with them into his adult years. As a child and teenager, Randy attended local schools. He was not known to be violent or disruptive during his early years. Most people who knew him later said he kept to himself. His main interest from a young age was the internet and making videos. In 2008, when Randy was 16 years old, he started a YouTube channel. He called it Pioneers Productions. At first, he made short comedy sketches. He worked with other people online, and at one point he even collaborated with a well-known YouTuber named Ray William Johnson. For several years, he posted this type of content regularly. Around 2014, Randy said he was feeling depressed. He decided to change the direction of his channel. He began working on an animated series he called Ember's Ghost Squad. The series was inspired by a character named Ember McLean from the Nickelodeon cartoon Danny Phantom. Randy brought together a group of animators and voice actors from the internet to help him make the series. As he became more involved in this project, Randy created multiple online identities. He managed 9 Twitter accounts, each one pretending to be a character from his series. He used these accounts to have conversations with himself. He also shared links to journals and videos he stored on a file-sharing site called MediaFire. Over time, Randy developed a deep emotional attachment to the characters in his series. He became especially focused on one character named Mackenzie West. He believed Mackenzie was his soulmate. He began to feel that he wanted to be with the characters permanently. Randy also struggled with his sense of identity. He later recorded a video in which he told his parents that he had been cross-dressing on Wednesdays when they and his brother went out bowling. He expressed a desire to undergo gender-affirming surgery. In his animated series, he voiced a character named Andrew Blaze. He described that character as a self-insert, and he said he believed the character, who identified as female despite having a masculine name, was who he truly was. During this same period, Randy developed a strong fascination with mass shootings. He studied the Columbine High School massacre in particular. He began to speak of the 2 shooters, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, as heroes. He said he wanted to meet them. Throughout the first half of 2017, Randy recorded and uploaded many videos in which he talked about his plans and his state of mind. On May 11, 2017, he posted a video showing 2 pistol-grip shotguns. He gave them names, Mackenzie and Rachel. He also talked about flipping a coin to make a decision about something he intended to do. He kept uploading files and journals online, documenting his thoughts in detail. By the start of June 2017, he had stored a large collection of writings, audio recordings, and video files that he would later refer to as his suicide tapes. On the evening of June 7, 2017, Randy Stair reported for his late-night shift at the Weiss Market supermarket in Eaton Township, Pennsylvania. He had worked at that store for 7 years, so he knew the building, the routines, and the people. He arrived around 11 p.m., the same as any normal shift. For the first hour and 40 minutes, he performed his regular tasks. But while he worked, he also moved through the store and quietly blocked several emergency exits. He did this without any of his co-workers noticing. After completing his initial work, Randy went to the crew area at the back of the store. There he blocked the remaining emergency exits. Then he walked to the front of the store and locked the automatic doors at the main entrance. He had brought a duffel bag with him that night. Inside the bag were 2 pistol-grip pump-action shotguns. He pulled them out. Randy began moving through the store with the shotguns. He encountered 3 co-workers. The first was Victoria Brong, a 25-year-old assistant tag manager. Randy shot her 4 times. The second was Brian Hayes, a 47-year-old night manager and a United States Navy veteran. Randy shot him 5 times. The third was Terry Lee Sterling, a 63-year-old shop assistant. Randy shot him twice. All 3 died from their wounds. He then came to another co-worker, Kristen Newell. Randy stood behind her while she worked. Surveillance footage later showed he stood there for about 5 seconds. He did not shoot her. Instead, he turned and walked to the next aisle. Randy then fired his shotgun at glass displays and merchandise throughout the store. He also shot at multiple small portable propane tanks that were on the shelves. The tanks did not explode. While he was doing this, Kristen Newell was able to escape from the store. Once she was outside, she called 911. Randy paused his shooting and walked to the deli section. He stayed there briefly, then began shooting at another group of items. While Kristen was still on the phone with emergency dispatchers, Randy placed the loaded shotgun into his mouth. He fired a single round through his palate. The shot killed him instantly. When police later counted the spent shotgun rounds, they determined that 59 shots had been fired. All of them came from only one of the 2 shotguns he had brought. The second shotgun was never used. Kristen Newell's 911 call brought emergency responders to the Weiss Market's supermarket. Police arrived at the scene and found the store locked from the inside. They had to force entry. Once inside, they discovered the bodies of Victoria Brong, Brian Hayes, and Terry Lee Sterling. They also found Randy Stair dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The scene was contained to the store, and there was no further threat to the public. Investigators began processing the scene immediately. They recovered 2 shotguns, one of which had been fired 59 times. They also found the duffel bag Randy had used to bring the weapons into the store. The blocked emergency exits and locked front doors showed that he had planned to keep people inside and prevent escape. As detectives looked into Randy's background, they quickly discovered his extensive online presence. He had left behind a large digital trail. In the hours before the shooting, he had uploaded his final YouTube video titled The Westboro High Massacre / Goodbye. He had also shared links to numerous files, including audio recordings he called his suicide tapes, a written journal, and a Microsoft Word document listing his many online accounts. These materials contained detailed explanations of his motivations, his obsession with the Columbine shooters, and his belief that he would be reunited with the characters from his animated series. Investigators used these files to understand why the shooting had happened. The shooting received local and national media attention. On the evening of June 8, 2017, hundreds of people gathered at the Wyoming County Courthouse for a vigil. 8 pastors were present. The community came together to honor the 3 victims. Family members of those killed spoke publicly, and a GoFundMe campaign was set up to help with immediate expenses. Weiss Markets responded by closing the store. A spokesperson said the company was deeply saddened and that the safety of employees, customers, and the community was their top priority. The store remained closed for several weeks. When it reopened on July 13, 2017, it had been remodeled. Some local residents said they would not return to the store because of what had happened there. Others accepted the decision to reopen, with one man noting that moving the store would have given Randy what he wanted. Mental health professionals later commented on the case. One psychiatrist noted that some young killers, like Randy, lose the ability to separate fiction from reality. A trauma specialist suggested that Randy's perceived lack of help for his gender dysphoria contributed to his desire for revenge. These observations were shared in news coverage following the shooting, but no criminal trial took place because Randy died at the scene. The case was closed with Randy Stair as the sole perpetrator. His 3 victims were remembered by their families and community. The Weiss Market's location resumed normal operations, and the town of Eaton Township continued on, marked by the loss of the lives taken that night. Story 8. Connor Stephen Betts was born on October 28, 1994. He grew up in Bellbrook, Ohio, a small suburb south of Dayton. His family lived in a quiet neighborhood, and by most accounts his childhood did not stand out in any public way. He attended Bellbrook High School, where he was known to some classmates as a quiet student. When Connor was 15 years old, in 2010, something happened at school that made others pay attention. He made a list of students he wanted to kill and rape. The list was discovered, and the school suspended him. The police became involved at that time because the list was seen as a serious threat. Some classmates later said that Connor had been bullied before the list was found. One classmate also said that around that same period, Connor had talked about shooting up the school. The school handled the situation with the suspension, but no further legal action was taken then. During his high school years, Connor had a girlfriend. She later remembered that he often told her about strange experiences. He said he had visual and auditory hallucinations. He also said he suffered from psychosis and was afraid he might develop schizophrenia. These mental health struggles were not widely known to the public at the time, but they were part of his private life. After high school, Connor stayed in the Dayton area. He lived in Bellbrook as an adult. He did not have a criminal record with major offenses, only minor traffic violations. He found ways to express himself through music. He performed vocals for a band called Menstrual Munchies, a group that played a very rough and shocking style of music known as porno grind. He performed with them on multiple occasions, and the band had a small following in underground music circles. In his free time, Connor spent a lot of time online. He followed politics and expressed strong opinions. He described himself as a leftist and said he supported Antifa. He also voiced support for political candidates such as Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. On social media, he made references to Satan, though those references were not tied to any formal group or religion. By the time he was in his early 20s, Connor lived a fairly ordinary daily life on the surface. He held no high-profile job. He spent time with a small group of friends, went to bars in the Oregon Historic District of Dayton, and continued to follow online communities. People who knew him casually did not see signs of what would come later. But those who knew him more closely recalled the earlier threats he had made in high school and the mental health struggles he had talked about. Those events remained in his past without any public action taken against him after the 2010 suspension. Connor Betts lived in Bellbrook and continued to spend time in the Oregon Historic District of Dayton. He knew the area well. On the night of August 3, 2019, he went out with his older brother and a friend. They entered a bar called Blind Bob's on East 5th Street. This was about 2 hours before the shooting. At around 12:13 a.m., Connor left Blind Bob's by himself. He walked to a nearby bar called Ned Pepper's. He stayed there for about 30 minutes. While inside, he sent a text message to his friend asking him to come to Ned Pepper's with his brother. The friend replied that he was still at Blind Bob's with Connor's brother. The friend said he was about to get tacos with him and would leave in about an hour. Connor left Ned Pepper's at 12:44 a.m. He went to his car, which was parked behind a restaurant called Thai 9. He opened the trunk. He took out several items. He put on body armor. He put on a jacket. He put on a balaclava-type mask that covered most of his face. He put on earmuffs to protect his hearing. He also put on a backpack. Then he walked to an alley that ran next to Blind Bob's. He stopped behind the bar and spent about 9 minutes there. During that time, he readied his gun and made final adjustments to his outfit. He was carrying an AR pattern pistol that was made to function like a rifle. It was chambered in .223 caliber and had a large drum magazine that could hold 100 rounds. Later, police would find an ejected live round in that alley where he had prepared. At around 1:05 a.m., Connor started walking north toward East 5th Street. In the alley, he passed a man who was walking back to his car. Connor did not shoot him. The two men greeted each other. The man noticed that Connor was wearing hearing protection and a mask. Connor reached the intersection with East 5th Street. He saw a man named Saeed Saleh. Connor fired 4 shots. Saeed Saleh was killed. At the same time, those bullets also struck Connor's own brother and his friend. Connor's brother was killed. The friend was wounded. They had been standing in line at a taco cart in front of Blind Bob's. Connor moved east down the south sidewalk of East 5th Street. He walked past the crowded patio of Blind Bob's. His brother was on the ground calling for help. Connor did not stop. He aimed his gun down the sidewalk and fired 8 shots. A woman named Lois Oglesby was killed. 6 other people were wounded. Connor turned north and walked between 2 parked trucks. On the other side of the trucks, he encountered a man named Derek Fudge. Connor fired 3 shots and killed him. Connor crossed the street. He fired 3 more shots. 1 woman was wounded. 1 bullet struck a car. He turned and moved east again toward the entrance of Ned Pepper's. He fired 23 shots in 2 separate volleys down the sidewalk. 5 people were killed: Logan Turner, Nicholas Kumer, Thomas McNichols, Monica Brickhouse, and Beatrice Warren Curtis. 10 other people were wounded. Monica Brickhouse and Beatrice Warren Curtis were on the ground trying to roll away from Connor when they were shot. They were the last people killed. Connor then started running toward the door of Ned Pepper's. Police officers had arrived and began shooting at him. Just as he reached the door, he fell to the ground. The officers shot him dead. From the first shot to the moment he was killed, 32 seconds had passed. Police had arrived within 20 seconds of the first shots. In that short time, Connor fired 41 rounds into the crowd. 9 people were dead. 17 others had gunshot wounds. 10 more people were hurt in other ways, such as from falls or panic, so the total number of injured taken to hospitals was 27. Connor had additional ammunition magazines with him. He was wearing body armor, a mask, and hearing protection during the attack. The firearm he used had been ordered online from Texas and picked up from a local firearms dealer in Ohio. After the shooting, police evacuated the bars and restaurants in the Oregon Historic District. They told residents to stay away from the area. The shooting was over, but the scene was left with the dead and wounded on the street. Within hours of the shooting, police and the FBI went to Connor Betts's home in Bellbrook. They searched the house and found evidence that showed a long-standing interest in violence. There were references to mass shootings, and there was evidence that Connor had expressed a desire to commit a mass shooting. Investigators later learned that he had fantasized about mass shootings, serial killings, and murder-suicide for at least 10 years, going back to his time in high school. The investigation looked into whether Connor had a political or racial motive. A preliminary assessment found no indication that race or a specific political ideology drove the attack. The FBI concluded in 2021 that Connor acted alone. He was not directed by any organization and was not aligned with any specific ideological group. Investigators also looked into whether he was connected to incel groups, but that line of inquiry did not change the overall conclusion about his motive. An autopsy was performed on Connor. The coroner found that he had cocaine, alcohol, and Xanax in his system at the time of the shooting. In one of his pockets, police found a vape pen and a small bag containing cocaine. The autopsy also showed that Connor was hit by 30 rounds fired by police. He had 6 other wounds from grazing and shrapnel. The coroner also examined the deaths of the 9 victims. 2 of the women who died had been shot by both Connor and by police. 1 woman was already bleeding from a fatal wound caused by Connor when she was struck by 2 police bullets. One of those police bullets would not have been lethal on its own. Another victim had been shot multiple times by Connor and received a superficial gunshot wound from police. After reviewing these facts, the coroner ruled that all 9 deaths were caused by Connor Betts, not by police gunfire. Police released details about the firearm. Connor had ordered the AR pattern pistol online from Texas. It was transferred to a licensed dealer in Ohio, where he picked it up. The gun was modified so that it functioned like a rifle. In the days after the shooting, Dayton's mayor thanked the police officers for their quick response. She said their actions prevented more deaths. 6 police officers fired a total of 65 rounds at Connor. The officers who responded were later offered support through critical incident stress management teams, which included mental health professionals, police officers, and chaplains to help them process what had happened. There was no criminal trial because Connor Betts was killed at the scene. No other person was charged in connection with the shooting. The case was closed after the FBI completed its investigation in 2021, confirming that Connor had acted alone and had planned the attack without assistance. The 9 victims were remembered by the community. A vigil was held on East 5th Street where 10 doves were released, one for each of the 9 killed and one for the injured. Local blood banks received donations and businesses supported relief efforts. The bar where the shooting began, Ned Peppers, posted a message expressing grief for everyone involved. After the investigation ended, the city of Dayton continued to heal, but the loss of 9 lives on a single night remained a lasting scar on the community. The attack lasted 32 seconds, but the consequences stretched across the years that followed, leaving families in a city to carry what could never be undone.